upset him, and he stewed about it for days. And as this brother was interviewed by Professor LeBaron on campus back in 1988, he was describing the conflict that he went through. He didn't have an answer. Why can't I hold the priesthood? And there was no answer for it. And he said, and he was asked, well, how did you work this out? And I think this is the point that I want to make here, and I think it's something that we all can learn wisdom from. He says, I asked myself, I was in this dilemma. I asked myself, okay, what do I know? I know the Book of Mormon is true. I know the Spirit has told me the Book of Mormon is true, that Joseph Smith is a prophet, and that the church is true, and that we have a prophet. What don't I know? I don't know why. I can't hold the priesthood. He said that he thought it would have been foolish. He concluded this after reflection, that it would have been foolish to throw away everything that he knew because of some things that he didn't know or questions that he didn't have an answer for yet. And then later, he received the priesthood. But he never knew why. And a lot of questions that we have, we may never know the why. And we may never have a direct answer, but we have to be patient. But let's imagine a scenario. Suppose I had joined the church, or I had decided to leave the church back in 1975 over the barley question. And I said, well, the fact was, all reliable scholars in anthropology, anywhere I would read, there was no pre-Columbian domesticated barley in America before Columbus, period. That's it. There was no evidence for it. Okay, this can't be right. Scholars say it. I'll leave the church. Wouldn't that have been a tragic mistake? 5 years later, they discovered what a terrible mistake I had made. Now, this may seem like just a small question, but I think that it teaches us a lesson that we have to be patient. We have to keep looking. And we have to do the best we can. I just want to close and let you know that I find the scriptures enlightening both spiritually and I find them a wonderful intellectual challenge. And I still have many questions about the scriptures, although I find answers to some things. There are a lot of things out there that I still have on the shelf that I hope to find answers to. But you gotta have the faith, you gotta have courage, because you're gonna have to walk in the dark a little bit sometimes before you get answers. But I think that overall, it's interesting to see that so many places that were once criticized, where the Book of Mormon is right on target. I guess I'm supposed to take a few questions.
Did a little study on that. I found out that there isn't any proof of camels in Jerusalem either until recently. But I went to the Brea tar pits and found that they had found 120 of them in the Brea tar pits in California. I was just wondering if you had anything to complement that.
Sure. First of all, some background. Originally, the question about the horse, as it was raised by critics of the Book of Mormon, was not the same as it was today. Initially, it was there never were horses in the Americas. And around the turn of the century, with things like the little Brea tar pits, but there are other examples, Mormon writers, I think there were several articles in the early recruitment eras where they pointed out that yes, there were horses in the Americas. Now, that criticism has changed. Now the criticism is, well, there may have been horses in say, late Pleistocene times, but there weren't any horses here at the time the Book of Mormon talks about. So La Brea tar pits is going to help you out on the horse question. It helped them out initially, but the question is now, and this is the question that we sometimes deal with, is how, is there evidence that the Book of Mormon survived in the Book of Mormon times and there were some horses? And that's an interesting question. And in fact, if you go to the farm's website, there's a response to some of that. Let me just tell you one thing about the horse. the things that zooarchaeologists, who are the people that deal with horse bones and that kind of thing, that study remains, will tell you is that it is rare to find the remains of animals that were not eaten. And usually, what archaeologists like to dig up trash heaps and that type of thing. And the second problem that you have is the question of among archaeologists, they want to find exciting things like pottery. Pottery's not that exciting to some archaeologists to do it, but there are. I'm sorry. One second. Lost my train of thought there. The question of the horse, though, is interesting because you have, for example, you know who the Huns were? You've heard of Attila the Hun? Okay, the Huns were a nomadic group in Asia, several hundred years. Each Hun probably had 300 horses during his lifetime. It was the whole center of their economy. Okay? And if you read Bookoni, who's the authority, leading authorities on Eastern Asia animal remains, he complains that there's not one usable horse remain to be able to find and identify before the period of the Huns. And yet we know there are millions of those, out there. And yet they don't, not one case has survived. And so the question is why? And then you have the question of what about Mesoamerica, where many Book of Mormon scholars, probably most of them believe the events occurred. Are there things about the climate and things that are conducive to the preservation of remains like that, even if there were? And Book of Mormon peoples wouldn't have had as many horses as the Huns by any means. And so it's, again, you have to be cautious. In the Bible, there was no archaeological evidence for lions until it was 1982. There was an article published on the first two examples of lions that were found. Lions are mentioned by the Crusaders and that kind of thing, but there was no archaeological evidence. So sometimes the archaeological evidence hasn't caught up to literary sources. And you may have a similar situation with the Book of Mormon. There's an article that I've written up that's on the farm's website under research reports on the horse, and I've given sources and some information on that. Lance, go ahead.
We working here?
Here we go.
Just a quick follow-up. A few years back, you wrote a response to a critique of the church on swords in the Book of Mormon. And I'm curious that this may go along with what you just said before. Do you have any explanation? Obviously, the Book of Mormon, your response was well done in that it dealt with the larger problem of the sword. But there is the text in the Book of Ether that talks about the Jaredites smelting metal swords. Do you have any explanation for why the archaeology for that hasn't been found? I know that the text itself says that even at the time that the Nephites encountered this land of desolation, it says the swords were cankered with rust. Even that, is that the explanation for that? Is that the metal they had didn't last long under the climate of the Central America, Mesoamerican area?
Well, we don't know. The reference you're talking about, there's a reference, the earliest reference, I think, to metal in the Book of Ether is, I think it's the reign of Shul, one of the early kings, and talk about one of his greatest feats was he molted out the ground and was able to make steel and make swords out of these. Later, he mentioned some other metals. The whole question of metals, there's a very good bibliography if you want to dig into the issue by John Sorensen on metals and metallurgy in the Book of Mormon text. And I've gone through a lot of the literature there. Metals are rare, even in the old world. There are a lot of surprises that we find. For example, I think that the issue of tin is an issue that was not thought to be known very early among the Hittites and ancient Assyria. And one of the things that they pointed out is that they actually found evidence of tin, and there are arguments that one would start with can't be tin that early, and yet there it is. So you have a similar situation probably in the New World. It's generally thought that metal comes much later, but there are a few anomalies that have yet to be fully explained. And then the question is, what do they mean by steel? Which is another question. But if you want to look at that, there are a few things written on it. Yes, go ahead.